What's up, everybody? Just want to take a quick second and let people know that I am self-supported. I now put all of my episodes on Substack for paid subscribers. I put them up early, and then 24 hours later, I release them to the public on all my platforms. I also have Venmo, PayPal, Cash App, Buy Me a Coffee, Zelle, a P.O. Box, and Locals, Patreon. And all of these, all of the links are in the show notes of every single episode I put out. So look forward to continuing to, provide great conversations. And thank you all for your continued support. This is the first time where we did not chat for 20 minutes. And I'm literally making it a point now with the people that I have on here regularly to say, all right, no 20-minute pre-talk, because that's like great stuff that people get to miss out, like people miss out on. So I'm actually proud of myself this time that we didn't spend 20 minutes chatting, because you two, I mean, EM and John, you guys have already spoken before.
Yes.
Yeah.
Briefly, yes, we did.
Yeah.
And never on a podcast.
Via telephone. No, via telephone. Yeah.
So how did you? Can you share what the initial discussion was? And
we have a mutual friend, another Irishman, and he introduced us virtually because I was beginning to understand that what I was picking up from Eric, his stuff about Islam and so on, was fitting like, hand in glove into my hypothesis about which I had for a while about delivering vacant possession of our countries by means of mass inward migration. In other words, that was the technique which was being used for the purpose of diluting the indigenous population, that being the population that cared, that loved, that remembered, that had a historical view, that had a patriotic view of the land they were standing in. And that was becoming a huge problem and needed to be eliminated. And that's essentially, I believe, what this was all about, because none of the other hypotheses, compassion or even globalism, don't really make full sense. Certainly not compassion anyway. Although globalism does have the ideology of globalism does have a role to play in this other hypothesis as well. And when I saw the article that Eric wrote a couple of weeks ago about this, it just seemed to kind of fill all the jigsaw in for me, pretty much. I think I have one corner. There's one piece in one corner I can't find, but everything else is there now. And I'm talking about, in general, I'm talking about my own country, Ireland, first of all, because that's obviously my main concern. But it's also, in my view, a kind of a pilot, a petri dish for other countries, and that has been used in that way for a long time, precisely because of the intensity of its historical experience and its Catholic past, and its the piety of its past, and the valor and the courage and all of that, the heroism and the martyrdom, and that these are all seen as problematic quantities that need to be understood and removed, almost like wisdom teeth. And that's what this is about as well. So that was how, and I had a very brief conversation then with Eric about this, because I was very interested in this. I had a kind of a question, which he answered very quickly, which was that the Islamic population of Ireland is, officially anyway, I don't know, I don't speak for what you see on the streets, but they say it's 80,000, or was in 2022, the last census. I am very skeptical about that anyway. Because I can't imagine that an awful lot of Muslims would be all that interested in staying in on census night, filling out this huge form. When I didn't do it, I went up to Belfast out of the jurisdiction in order to avoid having to do it. So I would imagine it's probably more, but in fact, Eric told me, look, all you need is 1 to 3% to do this, which is basically to secure the asset of, he'll explain it much better than I can. But what I've read of what his hypothesis is that they have already secured a certain form of ownership. via the acquisition of debt. And this has been solidified as concrete assets. And this is the third phase of this, is the physical human presence of boots on the ground, literally, which will secure that those assets as actual property in some part in the future, probably in the quite proximate future. That's I may be doing a disservice to the thesis.
No. It's a
Let
replication.
me, not to cut you off, just for people, Eric is EM, I'm assuming,
yes,
right?
Yeah. Eric Michael. Yeah.
I've never called you that before, but just for people if they got confused. For a second, I was like, Eric, it's EM. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, all good. This is what they did 400-ish years ago. This is what happened in the 1600s that sold the title, the debts and the title to continental European lands to the new structure that was created, was the Bank of England, which was really the title holder. And they had to take the crown because the crown ostensibly was the superior title, in contract law. And everything that was built out since then all went through and was registered through the City of London and the Bank of England. But they've taken everything that they can. They've expended everything that they can. They've run up vast amounts of debts, tens of trillions now. That's all owed to various entities, the Financialists. That's now offshore. Great documentary called The Spider's Web. And it's, the Financialists don't want to own the title to the land because you have to take physical and maintain physical possession of it. And they don't have the armies and the masses and the populace. They're a parasite. That's not how they live. What they want is the custodial fees for management of the titles, and they want transaction fees for the maintenance of, all of the various transactions that happen regularly between very wealthy, elite, powerful elite people, and which are used to obfuscate who actually has the current title. It's what they did to England and took over England, and thereby what would become the British Empire, and they completely, virtually erased English identity and replaced it with this British trash and tried to make us all live under that. And so now they're at that step 7 of the Financialist kill chain. Now they have to collapse it all. Well, what do you do with the first part collapsing? You financialize everything as you deindustrialize.
This episode is brought to you by McIlvaney Financial Group. Their advisors bring a depth of knowledge and experience that allow them to serve their clientele with care, ensuring their financial needs are met now and in the future. Personally, I'm not saying cash is worthless, but you can see what's happening. It's worth less every year. Gold is the opposite. Click on the promo link in the show notes or go to www.mcilvaney.com/coffeeandamike.
And then you work in various ways, usually historically war, but now in clever psyop ways to get women to not have children, to raise the cost of everything so that young men don't go out and find women to have children with because they can't afford to provide for them. And you depopulate the natives so that you can, and populate it with your poor and your dispossessed so that you can take physical possession, whoever holds the new title now. Well, who are the only peoples in the world, the only two peoples in the world, but really the only ones with the tens of millions of disposable violent young men? That's the oil kingdoms. That's the Muslim Arab world. Right? They try to do China, and China said, get out of here. You're not doing this to us, because what you'll do is set us up for collapse 100 years from now, 300 years from now. You've already taken us through collapse twice, once, and tried it again. We don't want to go through that again. So, I look at UAE right now, and I look at the laws, right? The carve-out laws for financial entities. in UAE, and they sure look like an update to the city of London 340 years ago, and what was carved out there, and how the, you know, how the wealth in the debts. So what is the wealth of these financialists? It's not the assets, it's the debt. But they have to lock that debt in as something that's, leveraging the assets, but they have to have somebody who's an asset owner that can physically take possession and hold it.
Who is the asset owner then, EM? Is that the people that are being forced to take this on?
No, I think the asset owners are the oil kingdoms. When Trump became president again this time, it was his first trip. He went to see MBS. Well, I don't know if it's his first trip, but he went to see MBS and praised MBS and the Arab nations, the oil nations. A superior king doesn't go see a subordinate king, in the whole vassalage system, right? Superior leader doesn't go see a junior leader.
Yeah, there's also, in this context, I'm reminded of something that happened in Ireland in 2011. A number of things happened. That was the year after the financial collapse, the first year of quasi-normality in a sense. But at the end of 2010, Ireland had a visitation from what was called the Troika, which was a representative of the EU Commission, the World Bank, and the IMF, who basically took possession of Ireland's economic sovereignty and basically beggared us and humiliated us and so on. And that was a kind of a very interesting moment, because it was the people were, for the first time in my lifetime, I remember the people being really angry and like almost like really a great bellicosity almost, you would say, overtook the people. And there was an election then scheduled for the following year, 2011, which was brought forward to the spring. And that was a moment when the present regime, there's been, since that moment, there was an election, there was a government, as it were, the wishes or the desires of the populace was frustrated in a very interesting way, which is that whereas a lot of people were talking about starting some kind of movement to fight this and to get rid of this toxic politics out of Ireland once and for all, this civil war politics that had gone on for nearly 100 years. And everybody was literally talking about this in the bars and on the streets and really furious. And then a movement did start, and it was called Democracy Now! And it was led by two journalists, Fintan O'Toole of the Irish Times and a guy called David McWilliams, who's now with the Irish Times, and who's also a World Economic Forum alumni. And they said, well, we're doing it. It's okay. Relax. Everybody should just chill. We're going to do this. We're starting this movement. We're going to take on this toxic system. And they started this process. But then the election was announced in January. And lo and behold, they say, oh, no, sorry, we don't have enough time. And as a result of that, what happened was that the most reactionary force in Irish politics and the most reactionary leader, a guy called Andy Kenny, we've ever seen, who subsequently sold Ireland out down the river, swept into power. And that essential model has been in place ever since. We've had changes, we've had elections, but it's the same government, essentially, different mixtures of different entities, but they're all the same. And so there was a coup. I call that the autogolpe assistite. It's an assistant coup, self-coup. And it was assisted from outside by forces which we could begin to speculate about then, because in May of that year, we had two visitations from the heads of state in the same week in May. One was the Queen of England, Elizabeth, who came for a few days. And the theme of that visit was, let's get over the past, put the past behind, no more of that talk about, resentment against our near neighbor and everything. We sort of, it was like our shared history, we had a shared history. Like I said, well, it's like we had a bit of a prang at the traffic lights and we both agreed to do our own repairs. That was kind of the vibe. But then the second visitation was 2 days later, Obama came to Ireland. And that was a really strange moment, because there was after he left, there was a very strange episode that happened where the media suddenly started to talk about this strange, this strange episode of plagiarism, which apparently had occurred during his visit, where the Taoiseach, the Prime Minister of Ireland, had literally stolen from Obama's acceptance speech of 2008 a paragraph right in front of him, standing on College Green in Dublin. And like they were literally going after Kenny for this. And I started asking around about it. And it was many years later, actually, when I figured out what it was about. Obama, it seems to me, is a critical figure in this whole thing. And what he was there in Ireland for, and what the Queen of England was, there was a certain kind of, I think, almost a cult ritual being played out of almost handover from one to the other. And it seemed to me that Obama was being offered, in effect, a kind of ownership of Ireland in some sense. The paragraph that Kenny read, is when you begin to, I'll read it out. When you think about it, Obama being elected president of the United, first black president of the United States in 2008. Yeah, you'll see what it means. You'll see why it fits. But then you think of the Prime Minister of Ireland in the centre of Dublin in 2011, saying the same thing, more or less, and you think, oh, what's that? So here's what it is. If there is anyone out there who still doubts that Ireland is a place where all things are possible, who wonders if the dream of our ancestors is alive in our time, who still questions our capacity to restore ourselves, to reinvent, and to prosper, well, today is your answer. And it seems to me that was kind of, that the dream of our ancestor was being realized by the presence of Barack Obama in College Green. The concept of reinventing ourselves in order to prosper. It seemed that this was a kind of the culmination of negotiations in which Ireland had essentially sold its soul. The leaders of Ireland had essentially sold Ireland down the river. They'd cut a deal which they regarded as kind of non-negotiable, in which the country was being handed over in some way. And Obama was somehow critical in this. Now, there's a very interesting kind of loop here, which has been fulfilled in the next month, because Obama is coming to the British Isles, as they're called. We don't like to call them the British Isles, but that's what the convention is. And he's going to give two speeches, one in London and one in Dublin, or not speeches, but interviews, public interviews, in the middle of September. And the one in Dublin, in the Tree Arena, is being conducted by Fintan O'Toole, the guy who led Democracy Now! And then didn't. As I said, on that occasion, the revolution has been cancelled because we couldn't find a babysitter. And that's kind of sealed Ireland's fate, really. Well, the critical moments when Ireland had an opportunity to, because I think you might agree with me, Ian, like that what we're talking about here is an absolute crime, an historical crime that has gone on for centuries, right? And particularly in the last 50 years, maybe that's my perspective.
Well, it's culmination. The last 50 years, it's culmination.
Yes, yes. Yeah. So therefore it's a crime. But what it seems to me is the imperative behind all of these theatrics and everything is to conceal the criminality of it and as some kind of organic phenomenon, which just so happened. It just happened like that. It's just too bad, but that's the way, When in fact, it's complete deceit, isn't it?
Yes. Right. So I have a question, right? A thing, and let me kind of talk it out now because it's just shaping up, right? I've wondered a lot about what the GFC, the global financial crisis, really was about. It was about real estate. It was about getting a bunch of people to purchase lands that they couldn't afford and were going to lose. And then pooling in this sophisticated, because again, financialists work all in legal language, right? Everything they do is in contracts. The magic, right, of contract law. If I wanted to, at the time, the banks in one form, the local regional banks in one form or another owned a lot of the land in the form of the mortgages, right? The mortgage obligations. If I wanted to take possession of the title of that land as cheap as I could, I might do something like the GFC and make a bunch of money off of it. But ultimately, who bought that debt? Not the first line. So the CDOs, right, collateral debt obligations were created, were sold to municipalities and small and regional banks.
But wasn't
and
that?
then
Oh,
it
sorry.
collapses. Yeah, go
No,
ahead.
no,
go
I
ahead.
didn't mean to cut you off mid-sentence. But wasn't that specifically in the United States? That was where the paper went through Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and then later repackaged the credit default
Again
swaps
and
and
again.
sold off and sold
Yep.
off and sold off.
Yeah. So ultimately, who ended up with this bad paper? Well, it was a lot of these municipalities and and some institutionals and small and local, small and regional local banks that were trying to, improve their balance sheets. Well, when all that collapsed, right? When all of that fraud and corruption collapsed, who was hit the hardest? All these local governments, small and local governments, small local investors, bankers, etc.
Yes.
Okay, that's one side. So now you've completely disempowered them. They need to be bailed out. On the other side, who ended up with all those titles? Through all of these complex things that we know about, but on the other side, somebody bought that debt.
Yes.
Pennies on the dollar. And it wasn't the government. So somewhere back 2006 to 2008, and then, all the way up into 2010, 11, 12, as this was all, finalizing and playing out, somebody bought the titles to all that land dirt cheap.
Yes.
Still got people living on it. And, who is one of those entities? BlackRock.
Yes.
That's owned by State Street and Vanguard. Right? So,
and they've become increasingly active and involved and embedded in the Middle East in recent times.
correct. Because they have something like just BlackRock, $22 trillion under management, something along those lines. That's title to a whole lot of companies and assets and land, et cetera. But they don't have the armies and the manpower to defend, to defend against vacant possession.
Yes.
Who
Yes.
does? And who doesn't play the big sophisticated tech derivative games, but plays real estate and natural resources very well? The oil kingdoms. And
Is
who
there
has?
Yeah.
Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Is there another layer, Ian? Is there another layer here as well in terms of what you might call the three-card tricks, which are being used in order to concretize those kind of debts as assets, as land and property?
Yeah.
What is the process there? Because, for example, there was David Rogers Webb's book, The Great Taking,
Yeah.
in which he described how the deeds of these, which had been used in mortgage transactions, etc., had actually been used multiple times,
Oh, yeah.
and the benefits of those would not, as everybody presumed, accrue to the person who's living in the mortgage house, who's paying off the mortgage. That it would be way up the chain, at the very top, at the BlackRock end of the chain.
Yeah.
Isn't that right?
Yeah. No, that's absolutely true. So that's how they, who ultimately holds the final debt paper is the one that has and can physically exercise it, is the one that actually has the deed.
Yes. Yes.
Right. And the way in which financialists work is the way in which magic spells work is there's the initial spell contract, and then there's all these additional spells that hypothecate that contract, put other obligations on that contract, put debts on there, different individuals involved, etc. And the only way the magic works is the buyers have to change frequently. such that the contracts change frequently. And you get enough, I think we're at something like 700 layers of these contracts, 700 layers of derivatives, right? So 700 spells, shall we say. And it's ludicrously complicated for even incredibly well-educated people and experienced in these different domains to get back down to the original contracts. Well, I can say the last time we had a clean title, right? Clean title for our, English-speaking peoples is 1688.
Definition of clean title. Yeah.
At that point, the crown and a certain small number of families had the legal ownership of all the assets of what would be called the British Isles. And that goes back to the Normans. That goes back to 1088, I think, and the Doomsday Book. And then everything, because that was and there was some horrible shit that happened there where people's lands were taken, et cetera, but they couldn't fight for it. They couldn't defend it. So some elite lord who could fight for it wound up with the title in Doomsday Book. But the Doomsday Book is the last time the English-speaking peoples had a clean title. And that ran up, right? Everything comes from that all the way up to the 1680s. And then they bring over a Dutch king and a traitor's frickin' Stuart wife, and they put him on the throne. Why? Because the crown had the superior title, right? The master title, going all the way back to 1000 or 1088 and everything that's come since. That's the last time we have a clean title. Then they stand up the Bank of England, which is, again, far less a bank and far more a title company, for all the assets they went and took from that around the world. Right? We don't have, maybe 1694 is a clean title, right? If we can go back and actually get those records and look. But again, the way in which these financialists works is the magic of contract law. And the way in which you hide the theft is, yes, there's all this conflict and wars and all, and that, the 2011-12 that you're talking about in Ireland, well, we had this thing, oh, by the way, Democracy Now! Was funded by what? USAID, right? If I remember correctly. In the United States, we had the Occupy movements, Occupy Wall Street, et cetera. And there were people that were doing really good work of paring all this away, right? Getting down to truth. So what did they do? They hit us with wokeism. All of a sudden, overnight, if you looked wrong at a gay, you were evil, right? And it all went from there. All this insanity, et cetera, right down to where they're gently mutilating children, right? All of that is to obfuscate and mask and to get us to not look at these things, to pare away the magic, right?
Yes.
So they have to move now because they're the ones who want to take possession, physical possession, right? Because possession is 9/10 of the law. That's not just the saying, it's the truth.
Yes.
Right? The other 10% is a contract, right? And the court's willing to, adhere to contract law. They have a bit of a catch-22 though. They have to move now also, and they have to the whoever the title owners are, right? And the financialists who are, the masterminds of this, all going back to the Praetorians of Rome, and they've been improving their craft all the time. And they hire the brightest people out of the best schools. I mean, they are literally the ones that, hire the smartest people out of the best schools and anywhere else. They got a bit of a catch-22. One, their own population numbers are collapsing just like ours, right? So their population rates in the Islamic world have halved over the last 20 years or so, and they're falling more rapid than ours, right? Now they had a bit more to go than we did. It's also happening in Africa. It's happening in Asia. It's happening all over. Population rates are collapsing. So within 20, 30 years, they're not going to have the manpower for a real fight. The other part is that Russia and China and the BRICS, but really Russia and China primarily, have said, we're not going to participate. We're going to go build our own system. And we're 80% of the world, and 80% of the population of the world, but also 80% of the manufacturing, 80% of the raw materials, right?
Yes.
And they're saying, no, we're not going to participate. We're not going to do this.
How will this process of taking possession play out? I mean, there are different elements. He says, as you say, and you say it's the 10% is the contract aspect of it.
Yeah, yeah.
But David Rogers Webb seems to think that that's a much more significant element of it, in the sense that he said the courts of the West have already been readied up in order to deliver what is required.
Oh, they already did it.
That's all signed off on.
It's already done. The
Yeah.
thing is you have to physically exercise the contract.
Yeah. Oh,
See, that's the magic, right? The magic of, okay, so the court adjudicated this, so it's a done deal. It's like, no, forgive me, guys, I'm going to swear, but it's like, no, motherfucker, you have to actually come and take it, right? Good old Malone Labe.
So doesn't that imply a very specific targeted series of attacks on particular properties, as it were?
Well, it has to be land in general. They don't want to go to attacks. They don't want to do it. They'll do a little here. They'll do the humiliation rituals. They'll get us, they want to try and do all of that. One, because these are estrogenic, passive aggressive fucks. And two, they know from the last 20 some odd years that should people like us decide we're going to fight, we're pretty damn good at it.
Mm.
And we like it. And so they don't want to do a real knockdown, drag out fight because they know they'll get slaughtered.
In the United States, I would say yes. I'm not sure about other places in the West.
Well, you know what? Thing is, Ireland's got what, 4 million-ish native population?
About 3.5, yeah.
Yeah, you got 10 times that outside Ireland. Good 20% of those or more would come into Ireland if there was something.
Yes, if there were less. I mean,
right?
Yeah. It makes sense. It absolutely makes sense. It ties in also with Michael Yon's broadly with his hypothesis about the purpose of these people as an invasion, that they're invading armies, and that they're. Would you say that it's that engineered? Are they trained? Are they equipped? Are they?
Some are, tiny fraction are, but what's more dangerous for us is that if you look at these people, spend time talking to them, look at them in the streets, the things on the news, they're expendable. They're being pushed out of their own territories and their own, lands, homelands, because their own leaders don't want them. They're useless. They're body bags. The problem is we'll have to kill 20 to 1, 50 to 1 of ours to get rid of the disposables. And we're going to be less inclined to do so just as human beings if they're not trained.
Yes.
If they are just a plague.
Yes. Yes. It fits, again, going back to Ireland, and I'm using this as a kind of an illustration as much as I am. Obviously, I'm very fixated on Ireland, but it makes an awful lot of sense in the context of things, minor things that we didn't take a lot of notice of. Well, we did, but they seem to be merely gaslighting or something. For example, there a couple of weeks ago, one of the great shrines of Irish history is the GPO, the General Post Office in Dublin, which was the site of the 1916 Rising, which was the rising which basically overturned the British Empire on Ireland. And you had this an Islamic procession from Christchurch, which is a Protestant Catholic cathedral, which is along by the River Liffey, just off it, and then marching along up all the streets up to the GPO, and the idea was that they would conduct some kind of ceremony there, and there was a protest waiting for them, and they didn't succeed in getting access to the area, which was a great joy in itself. But one of them, they went to the steps of the central bank, and one guy with a very pronounced Middle Eastern accent made a speech in which he said that Ireland is our land. And he said that we love Ireland, we love this land more than the other Irish do. So that seems to be gaslighting. But now, seen in the light of your hypothesis, it's a literal description of how they see reality, right?
Yes.
Now, the other thing is that the as I said earlier, there has been this coup, this auto golpe, and there is basically, even though there's been 4 elections or something like 3 elections in the intervening for over 40 years, um, there essentially is the same ideological government, the same two main parties involved one way or another, and the same personnel and the same viciousness and cruelty and contempt emanating from all of those people in those governments. But the opposition then is taken up by Sinn Féin, which was the political wing of the IRA
Oh,
years. And they were like obviously a nationalistic Republican party, or so we believed, until the Good Friday Agreement, and almost the next day they turned around and came back as a woke party, as a globalist party.
yeah, yeah.
And I think the word is that they've been funded by the Open Society Foundation. And for the last couple of years, their leader now is a woman. She was never involved in any nasty business, as far as I know. But she's been meeting up conspicuously with Muslim leaders or imams, dressed in a hijab all the time.
Yeah.
Again, that doesn't make any sense other than as madness, right? You think
No,
she's
she's subordinate. She knows it.
yes, she's carried away.
Leadership in the United Kingdom and in Ireland are the property managers for the new owners. And if you see them in that context, and you everything they're doing just makes sense.
Yes.
They're property managers.
Yeah, there was a couple of incidents. Then there was the monument erected at the historic town of Drogheda, which turned out to be a Muslim symbol. Nobody knew until it was up there. These things are happening all over the place. There's something like 50 mosques in Ireland now, which is a phenomenal number. And of course, we know that from the Muslim Brotherhoods that when these people come into your country, they come to create what they call a settlement. Mm-hmm. Which is to bring down your civilization. They're not in any way secretive about it. There was a statement issued by the Brotherhood back in 1991, where they said as much in respect of America, that they would, bring down their miserable house, and that's it seems what they wanted to do. But you see, this is the astonishing thing, Ian, that despite all of this evidence, there is this extraordinary belief. And it's not disingenuous. Not all of it is disingenuous. Maybe very little of it is disingenuous on the point of wokeness. I know there's a woke element which is disingenuous, clearly. But the general population genuinely believe they're dealing with a phenomenon of compassionate overreach or something like that. That when all
weaponized empathy. Yeah.
Yes. But then it's like these guys are so, and I say to them, look at these guys, look at their faces. Do you really think they stay awake at night worrying about, people from Africa or the Middle East or any place but people do believe that because it seems that the idea of the black face, the colored face, exercises a kind of spell on the Irish person's mind. We had that as children, we one of the rituals in class in the morning was you lined up at the teacher's desk with your pennies, and you put the pennies into a poor box, which had a black person kneeling on top, made of china or whatever.
Yeah,
and when you put your penny in, the black baby would nod thankfully at you. And this was like, this kind of became ingrained in the consciousness of Irish people. And they just can't get over it. They can't imagine, it seems, many people, that you could attribute any negative emotion or action or thought to a black person. It's unthinkable. And as a result of that, they have us completely. There was an episode there in the last few days where a Muslim leader, in fact, he's probably the premier imam in the country, and he came out with quite a critical statement about the government of Ireland. This is interesting, your development. I haven't seen this thing before, where he's criticizing them for for not providing for integration, for not explaining the importance of immigration, and and also for failing to look after the working class Irish people in the context of housing, because this had created massive suspicion and conflict and there have been a series of supposedly of attacks on Indians now in the last few couple of weeks, and this is now a talking point. Of course, Irish people get attacked in the street every day of the week, but nobody ever has a debate about it. So all of these things, it seems, converge, and I think this is true of every country in Europe. Although we're actually we're way behind the wave, really. Places like obviously France, Germany, Sweden, Italy, they're way ahead, and Spain is catching up again. I go to Spain quite a lot, into Andalusia, which was once a caliphate, and for a while there it looked that they'd managed it, because the Spanish men, unlike the Irish men, have balls, and they don't allow any messing. And I was aware of stuff like that happening, visitations, to people who are getting above themselves. But now it seems there's a new wave, and it seems that a lot of men are coming in, and that there will be an attempt relatively soon to reclaim the caliphate in Spain. So
Mike and I had this conversation months ago now, right? We have to remove women in the estrogenic from power, or we're done.
When you said that, I don't even mean to keep cutting you off, but I never forgot that when you said that to me, and looking at that now, and again, I'm talking about in terms of the United States, I would bring it even farther down to seeing from a governor. I'm gonna get some shit for this, but mayor, like, God, the shit I've been getting from people over the last few days has really been unbelievable. Side note, but I'm trying to be objective, and I that's how I feel. Would you go as far down as that, mayor, governor?
Oh, I would go down to any level that's above the level of family. Now, there are some rare exceptions. We've had a couple there in, again, the British Isles, but, in Greater England, I think that's the better term. Rare exceptions across centuries. But, and I say the estrogenic, right? Because that's estrogen-rich males as well. It's not just, women.
Yeah.
Straight up, throughout all of human history, one constant: there come times where a people have to stand and physically fight for their land. And if they don't, they get replaced. That goes back, 10,000 years, 20,000 years across Europe, with peoples coming out of the, Central Asia and the steppes of Central Asia. This has happened again and again and again. At some point, the wealthier, stronger, healthy, the women the matriarchs who actually love their land and peoples, if you have any left, take a step back and tell their men, go do what you got to do. And then those women who work in the world of women and have a very different, when I say remove women from power, I mean from government, I mean from institutions, etc. Women have the ultimate power. They are the only ones, the elite, truly elite, not all these excess elites, but truly elite women are the only ones that have the resources, the relationships, when they get into the position and state to say, look, we're going to end this, they're the ones that give their men the permission to go do what they have to do. Because if we don't get that permission from our women, in an estrogenic society, we wind up in prison for defending our people. And
Yes.
now it's not even physically, it's just verbally.
And in the context of women in power, could it be described as empathy without reason, or without a minimum of reason?
Well, it's weaponized empathy is what it is. Give me a second. The problem that we have in women, and specifically women, is they are at the cellular level up, locked in genetic warfare. That's the soul and makes sense evolutionary wise, right? A woman's purpose is to ensure the best that she can that her genes passed forward as the dominant genes in the community. And so by nature, she's locked in genetic warfare with any other gene producing individuals that might produce offspring that she and her future descendants have to compete with. That's easily manipulated, because then you get some women in power who like the invasion, because her genes are never going to, her family's genes are never going to mix with these foreigners. And if they do, they're going to get kicked out of the family and out of the wealth. And they'll deal with the rabble later.
Yes, and another factor that I think is important is that women in power seem to apply almost the logic or the emotions of the nursery to geopolitics.
Consensus. They're going for consensus, and sometimes there is no consensus. Sometimes there's only one right answer, and that's violence.
Yes, and they introduce, clemency and mercy before before the verdict is delivered.
The problem is that half the time, 90%, maybe not 90%, that's not generous enough. Probably 67% of the time, 60 to 70% of the time, though, that mercy and generosity is a lie, because they know it's going to hurt some people. Not dealing with that problem, right? Not doing the hard thing. It's going to hurt some people, and it's going to reduce the genetic competition from some people.
But isn't there an awful lot of myopia as well, Ian? I mean, it's not possible that people could behave as they're behaving in Western countries now, while understanding, even in crude terms, the nature of what's happening, really. They seem to actually believe this idea that it's some kind of wave, a massive wave of a humanitarian crisis and a wave of compassion coming out of the political establishment in order to deal with this. And even though that's complete nonsense and clearly nonsense, people want to believe it, and therefore they do, or behave like they do.
Yeah, so I'm going to say that I suspect that the unhealthy, resentful women that are really in control of most everything, and the, estrogenic and predatory males, are driving things to a place to where they know that we're going to have to slaughter a bunch of people. There's no other choice. And that's what they want. That's what they wanted the whole time. Come in, flood our countries, flood all this, create all this chaos and problems so that those other men, not ours, of course, because our men are good, do what they got to do. And then they use that against us for the next 100 years, that we did all this evil stuff, this violent stuff.
Yes. Yeah, that makes sense. Nevertheless, to watch people in the face of what's happening, and it doesn't seem to matter how much it escalates, how bad it gets, how much criminality it brings, how much the rape numbers increase. Still, they blank it all, and then they come.
It's genetic warfare. It's genetic.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
They come with the assault back against the far right, who are trying to. They're the people who are not far right at all. They're just people trying to warn.
Yeah. Okay. So, John, give me a second, because you just triggered something. The conundrum they are in now is they realize it's gone too far. They realize that the only way to deal with this is it goes violent. And they're afraid that it's going to go violent against them because they're the ones that fostered it.
Yes.
And, the honest truth is it's the women at the top, which there in Ireland, you probably got maybe 2 handfuls of them.
Yes.
And they think they can just get on their jet and fly out.
Well, they operate by shaming men, fundamentally, and so therefore they actually turn the men into de facto or almost women.
Yes.
Men follow their emotional lead in everything.
Yes. So he can maybe get a chance to pass on his genes, which means that in order for him to get a chance to pass on his genes, he gets partnered with one of their women and some of the assets related to her. Yes. That's the old way, right? All these old families across Europe and even here in the United States, they're all old matrilineal families, because patrilineal lines rarely make it to 200 years. Matrilineal lines can go for centuries on centuries.
And so this seems to kind of almost portend a pattern, a succession of loops, really, You know, you have World War II, followed by the 1960s, followed by, you know, shame and guilt and all that. And then the cycle starts over again with another war.
Yeah.
And on we go.
Yeah. Well, this time the war's at home. We can't, because we can't force project anymore. So now the war's at home or we're done. And the only ones that are going to decide to go to war are the ones that actually have the assets. And those are women. Because they, to your point, they have to tell their men, go be violent.
And the men mostly die.
And the men mostly die. They're okay with that. Men were always expendable. And as a man who's done expendable things, I'm okay with that. I just don't want to be, you know, as I expend myself, I don't want it to be a waste.
This is a very interesting thing because, Ian, because you wouldn't know this, but my kind of past, one of my big themes going back as a journalist, back in the early part of this, back into the late 90s really, was fatherhood, the attacks on fatherhood, the family court's treatment of fatherhood, male suicide, the neglect of men's health, all of these issues, right? Which got me into terrible trouble. I was Ireland's leading misogynist. I may well be that, except I'm lots of other things as well on top of that. So that's on the chart a little bit, you know. It's behind homophobe and racist and all.
Yeah. All the other lovely labels.
Yeah. What I used to say to women, you know, I suppose what you might call the more moderate women, if that wasn't my delusion, is like, ain't you got no sons? You know, like, what are you doing? You're everything you think, everything you say, is an attack on the future lives of your own sons. Don't you care about that? And they would just shrug as if I was talking nonsense.
Because Ireland's been under attack for 1,300 years. See, I had this conversation with Crypto Rich the other day, right? And I think it's something that's very, very important. I've had this conversation with special operations guys, very, very experienced guys, right? Bloodletting kind. We have to realize that warrior peoples and people who have, you know, peoples who have been predated on by warrior peoples, mothers have had to have a very unique relationship with us because there was a vastly higher likelihood her son was going to get killed in some conflict. And so what we find in these societies, you know, Scandinavian societies, English, Scottish, Irish, you know, all the goodies, right?
Yes.
Is that the mothers have oxytocin deficits. They don't bond with their sons as well. And this is a pretty well-known thing, especially in special operations. All the guys who are actually fighters, it's disproportionate number of those men that have horrible relationships with their mothers. Something like 70, 80% of us.
Wow.
Well, think about it historically, you know, go back thousands of years. What's happened in Ireland? Ireland's had the Scandinavians, the Vikings, the Scandinavians who were Viking, because that's a verb, right? It's not a noun. The Scandinavians, it had the English, you know, Cromwell. There's been nothing but war and let's just be honest, the Irish were fucking up the Irish long before everybody else got there, right? So what you wind up with, and oh, by the way, it's a known thing. I was in Cambodia, and I had a Cambodian woman tell me about this thing about Irish mothers devouring their sons.
Well, you know, this is a very interesting thing because there is a story related to this, which goes back to what are called the famines. I mean, it's a complete misnomer, the genocides of the 1840s. And that was really one of the most traumatic, it was the most traumatic period in Irish history when, you know, we lost 2 million people died, 2 million people disappeared, went across to America, to Canada, to Britain, wherever. And as a kind of, there was a belief at the time, whether it was honest or not, it was hard to say, that the reason for this was, of course, it was genocide, but that the explosion in the population that had occurred in the previous century, which had gone like from about 3 million up to 8 million, had left the Irish population very vulnerable. And when the potato failed, then they were inevitably going to come to grief. Of course, the real reason was that the English were exporting the food from the ports, even as the
And
people.
wanted the land. And
Yes.
wanted all the free men off the land. Yeah.
Well, here's the interesting thing. In the wake of that, there was what is now called a devotional revolution. The Catholic, there was a Cardinal Paul Cullen came over from Rome and took charge of the church in Ireland. And he created this kind of attempt, what was really an attempt to control population from within the family, in which the church commandeered the mother, recruited the mother as its moral agent in the family, and made her, and put as her kind of model, the Blessed Virgin. There had been an apparition.
A wee bit of a saint.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that sexuality was therefore demonized, and men were seen as predators and, lusty, degenerates and so on. And they were more or less banished from the lives of their children, in terms of education, in the context of being able to have an involvement in their education or rearing. They were basically out on the land or down in the pub. And even the pub became a very interesting place, because it was, a place where men met. It was a refuge from all of this kind of culture of the
Toxic
church.
femininity.
Yes. And of course, the mothers then chose the next generation of priests. So there was the kind of a symbiosis, and it became a kind of a chicken and egg situation where you were never certain who was in charge in this whole relationship of priest and mother. And so, and that is, and had one of the critical effects of that whole culture was that Irish population marriage rates fell to the floor. People got married in their 50s rather than in their 20s or 30s. They didn't have children very often. And even when those people immigrated to the United States or Canada, the same patterns were found in those families as well. And particularly, this is the really fiendish part, that this was particularly true of families which had among their number a priest or a nun. Because that the veneration of celibacy, of chastity, was so extreme that it caused people to behave in a certain way, even when they were thousands of miles away from home.
So this is the sainting of femininity. This was the elevation to sainthood of women.
Yes, for sure. And so I've always said it, like people talk about, in Ireland as elsewhere, the cliche-ridden political discourse, ideological discourse refers to the patriarchy. And I said, well, Ireland was never a patriarchy. It was a matriarchy disguised as a patriarchy.
Yeah. I've written to this, actually, that patriarchy is a lie, in prose. I wrote an article and I wrote some prose. I'm going to publish a book of prose here soon. But I've written to this very thing, that patriarchy is a lie. It's a lie fostered by unhealthy women who are engaged in genetic warfare and only want their resources. They want to be in total and absolute control, and they want to dictate who does and does not have children. Well, that requires control over the flow of resources. And in order to do that, you have to create these artificial status hierarchies. Terribly sorry.
Yeah, but here's the thing then, when you bring this full circle into the hypothesis we've been outlining earlier, and the Islamification of Ireland, if that's what it is, which will actually cause Ireland and any other country that it takes over to regress back to the Middle Ages, in effect, and never or nowhere as much as in the context of male-female relations, where men and women, where men are restored to dominance under Islam over women, and there's a very interesting novel, I don't know if you've come across it, it's by Michel Houellebecq, called Submission, which was published in 2018, and it's a prediction that it's obviously it's a novel, so it's a prediction of the first Islamic government takeover of France in 2020. But what's really interesting about it is the way that he very delicately sets out a scenario whereby, as you read it, you begin to understand that it's entirely possible that liberal societies will surrender all of their liberal values and succumb to precisely the Middle Ages ideology of Islam.
Yes.
Do you think that's reasonable?
So, okay, give me 1 second. They want to be subjugated because when there isn't a strong figure in their life, life is chaos and nonstop conflict. I mean, look at women. Look at women's conflicts with one another. It's insane. They want some strong figure there. The problem is that all the incentive structures in the world of women aren't there to support them in that anymore. Right? It's women who set the incentive structures that men develop themselves into, self-sufficient, stable, healthy, well-balanced, strong individuals.
Yes.
Because men have to adapt to how they can earn a living. And if those incentive structures are owned and set by women, and they're owned and set by women to continue this nonstop, all-out female versus female genetic warfare, what winds up happening is you wind up with exactly what we have. Just chaos. And they want that to change, but they can't do it themselves because the women are locked in this all-out freaking genetic war.
Are there some countries that are better than others? I mean, I think Ireland is a pretty bad case. But I think, for example, Italy has a different kind of chemistry.
I don't know. I think countries that are doing it well are Poland and Hungary, and it's some of these Eastern European countries who went through the collapse, right, under the Soviet period, and less the Sovietization, but the collapse that happened, 20 years or so at the end of the Soviet area, and those peoples, the Russians, the Poles, the Hungarians, Croats. They all seem to be the Slovaks. I get Slovenia and Slovakia mixed up, but it's the peoples of the former Soviet bloc that seem to be the ones that are doing this right.
Do you think that in Western Europe and to some extent in America as well, and certainly in Canada, that there is what you would call, like Douglas Murray in his book The Strange Death of Europe, which nearly 10 years ago now talked about this, about the almost that the will of the Western people was flagging, was dying, and that their story had run out, and that their imagination, as it were, had atrophied, and they could no longer imagine their future, and therefore that they were basically suffering from, as I understood what he said or implied, was a form of collective suicidal ideation.
Give me 1 second. Murray's kind of rather disappointed me and a bunch of people here of late with going down certain pathways. But I think World War I and World War II exhausted us. As a society, civilization. I don't know if you and I said this, but I don't believe we in the West have recovered from World War I and the slaughter, just pure amorality of industrial scale slaughter. I don't think we have psychologically recovered from that. We went into a depression. Yes, depression's economic. No, I mean, if you look at the art and the change in art of all forms from World War I into the 1930s, if you look at the decadence and the alcoholism, the drug use and all of that, and prostitution and everything else, we were in an actual depression. World War I made us as civilizational peoples, continentals and then us in the Isles, it depressed us. And then how did we come out of the depression? We slaughtered it on even a larger scale, all over the world.
Yes.
And and then we've been locked in these, financialist wars ever since. I believe fundamentally, we've never taken stock of we've never taken stock of the insanity that was introduced into our civilization by World War I. And men, testosterone, it carries, that's the epigenetic memories. And we're carrying that unbelievable exhaustion and trauma over the last century that's just gotten repeated again and again and again. And because of that, and because of the manipulations of unhealthy women and estrogenic, predators and bad people, men have just backed away. We're exhausted.
Has this ever happened before?
Yeah, several different times in history. Yeah. There's actually the articulation that that's what the Dark Ages was. Because it wasn't, art and literature and everything flourished, right? So the whole nomer of Dark Ages, and yes, there's some climate stuff from, cooling for a couple periods of time, et cetera. But if we look at the last time our people, well, when were the Dark Ages? Hell, we'd had centuries of war.
Yeah.
Centuries of war. Every season, right? Every fighting season, our ancestors, whether they're on the continent or in the Isles or both, were at war for something like 200 years, 300 years.
And behind all of this, of course, there's the puppet masters. Then
It's the financialist.
yes, and they've always been there, as it were, isn't it?
Yes, yes.
And is that just a fact of life, do you think, or is there a means? I mean, we've come through a democratic phase.
Yeah.
We would have expected, maybe naively, that it would deal with such issues, but it didn't.
Well, they made that. They created it. That was an artificial structure. Because the only thing that actually, the only thing historically that defends against this is decentralization of power and princes who have good, solid relationships with their people and the land.
Yes.
The problem is that they can be driven into the war with one another so easily. Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Well, and that's where what we're seeing in America right now, because decentralization, they lose power, but we're seeing centralization happening across the board.
Yeah, you've been saying this, and initially I wasn't picking up quite what you're saying, right? I've been watching on the side, but you're absolutely right. What's happening now is the illusion of decentralization, but it's massive centralization.
And that's in healthcare, law enforcement, financial.
Yep. Everything.
So you see it too.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely true. Right. John, to your question, I wrote the little primer book, The Eternal War. And I've looked at this very question since I was a kid, quite literally, because I was trying to understand my own mother, to be quite frank. Which is what little boys do, right?
Yeah.
I was trying, and my younger brother, who was very, probably a psychopath, from the time he was just a child. It seems that about 30% of the population is just wired this way in various degrees, right? It's a gradient scale. And I think that they're with us. And then, different percentages of the population that are wishy-washy. And I call them resentfuls because if you ever talk to them, like serial killers and the serial killers that are really good are the ones that get 1 million men killed in a battle, right? Forget the guy that's got somebody chained up in his basement. That guy's a small fry, right? It seems to me that this is a forcing function on our species, at every scale, from the family up, that this resentful, envious motivation that leads to malevolence and evil, if unchecked, and every time it's unchecked, is a forcing function on the species that keeps us in a constant state of adaptation. Because if we're not in a constant state of adaptation, even a slight change in the environment could wipe us out. Right? When a major cataclysmic change occurs, you don't have time to figure out how to solve the problem. You've already got to be in the action of solving all kinds of complex problems. So I suspect this is something that goes back before mammals. I think it goes to single-celled communities In fact, I think it goes all the way back to chemistry and physics. It's what's called dissipative structures. These structures that emerge because of the entropy and the chaos in energetic fields. So
Yes.
I think they're about 30% fixed, and then can be up to 80% of a populace at any given time, depending on how well the 20% is the staunch enemy of them comes together and stands and fights, right? Malone Labe, right?
What you see, going from there, I mean, one of the illusions which we appear to have taken on board in our time in the 20th century, particularly, is this idea that we were on some kind of progressive trail in which democracy was going to, uh, make perfect human existence, more or less, and now we see that that was always falling apart from the beginning, but
Yeah.
that in an era which lends to, leaders to the capacity for despotism at the drop of a hat, that they have access to control mechanisms that were never dreamt of by some of the great tyrants of the past. That it just seems to say that for all that people continue to use the word democracy as if it were like saintly in a concept, like that you almost genuflect every time you hear the word democracy, that it is actually a completely useless system of government, really, governance.
It's magic. Yeah, no, it's back to the financialists. Democracy is contracts, right? Democracy works because we all agree to this magic set of contracts, laws,
Hmm.
and the application and practice of this magic collectively. But it's
Yes,
just magic.
and then you used the word which is
Yeah.
prince, and
Mm.
and immediately, of course, all the alarm bells go off everywhere.
Oh yeah, 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 yeah.
You, you
Yeah.
know,
Down with
and,
princes. Yeah.
yes, and yet there is a kind of a mixed history, obviously.
Yeah.
Is not the natural instinct of power or of the powerful to corrupt, and therefore that the prince is a danger ipso facto? That appears to be it's the kind of the democratic view of princes and of princedoms, isn't it?
The most evil princes we have in the history of the world, this goes back to Plato's writings and before, right, are oligarchs, unaccountable princes, merchant princes.
Hmm.
There's zero accountability. At least a hereditary prince, he lived in a house, in a castle, and his people come tear him down with pitchforks and torches one night.
Yes.
And if we look, with some exceptions, of course, the princes were on the whole fairly good. Most of the beauty and the complexity of our civilization was all developed and designed under princes. The great cathedrals, the great works of art, the great conflicts that prevented the enslavement of our people all happened under the leadership and the guidance of hereditary princes.
Yes.
And not in some distant past, but right up till the first part of the latter century. And now, if we look and see, like here in the United States, all this was going down a pathway until a small handful of billionaires, which is half of Trump's cabinet, old stock Americans said, "We're not doing this anymore, and we'll fight you for it." It's not some common man who went to Harvard and was all about democracy. No, these are billionaires. These are modern princes that are realizing that they have to act like hereditary princes to stop this. Now they're trying to operate within the bounds of this, constitutional construct, and I think that's solid, but that's English,
Well,
right?
it's a form of, I suppose, financial noblesse oblige or something like that, is it?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, because what is a hereditary prince? A hereditary prince is a shepherd of the land and the wealth generated by the lands,
Yes.
right? But when you have a merchant prince, they have none of that noblesse oblige. I love that term, by the way, right? They have none of that.
Yes. Like you see, it's the the collective imagination has become stultified with certain concepts of phenomena that have failed abysmally, and
well, but we've also been over the last 300 some odd years, but really about 400 years, and it was started in the church by the Venetians, become Dutch, become city, right, by the Financialists. But this down with princes thing started in the 1500s, such that and what did they do? They tied up the princes in wars for 300 years, such that the people were like, well, the princes are useless. It's always war. Well, the princes weren't the ones that wanted to go do all that stuff. They had debts and they had obligations, and the markers were called in, and or the financials would pay the guy next door to come and, hey, I'll excuse your debts if you go in war with your neighbor. Sorry, go ahead.
Okay, well, let's just park princes for a moment and move into more dangerous territory. In a certain sense,
we kick it up. We want to kick it up a notch, guys. Want to take it?
We've already pissed off women. Let's now piss off everybody.
Should we go after the boom? You want to go after the boom? You want to take a few minutes and attack boomers? Because I've been getting a lot of heat for that one lately.
Okay. I heard an interview with. I heard a statement which made me sit up by Curtis Yarvin at one point. And he says, it's about time we started to get over our inhibitions or something like this.
Our aversions.
Aversions to the word dictator. Right? Yeah. Now, that's a pretty radical suggestion. Is that closely related to the princes thing?
Actually, if you look actually at the word dictator, it was quite literally oligarchs would raise one amongst them with dictatorial powers to fight and burn out the financialists. That's where the word comes from.
Wait, say that again.
And that goes all the way back to the ancient Greeks. Yeah, go ahead.
Say that again. Say the dictator, the origin. The
actual word dictator or tyrant, right, depending, is actually referenced back to the Greeks, right, back in antiquity. And this is in other areas. And in his own way, Michael Hudson, the financial guy, the banking historian, economist, articulates this. But that term, whether it's dictator or tyrant, meant an oligarch that was raised by all other oligarchs with supreme power in order to fight the financialist control, right? This insidious bleeding into and rising to power of all these resentfuls that were corrupting and stealing everything in all these clever ways. And then, you have a guy like Syracuse who then gave up the power. You rarely get him to give up the power. That's the other thing. Julius Caesar did not cross the Rubicon without the invitation of nobles, senators, and people. He waited. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. Now we have an archetype in our cultures going back millennia, which is that of the Great Father. Yeah. Which is, the Great Father is a figure who, uncontroversially, relatively speaking, until recent times, was a selfless being who put his children and his wife before him. He looked after them, he provided them, he protected them, he defended them, and that was the model for the family. For all that, let's just allow that there were some exceptions, but I don't think that that's important in the sense that the archetype remains, and it seems that this archetype has become so abused and so disparaged and so calumnified that we have lost a very important thing, because for all that it's power corrupts and absolute power corrupts absolutely, yes, but many times it doesn't. We have good people, good men who are capable of leading their peoples proudly and intelligently and ethically. And we seem to have forgotten that possibility in our modern world. And out of that, we have generated massive chaos because the systems we've generated out of that reaction just don't work.
Well, we handed the world over from testosterone to estrogen. But again, I think it's because testosterone is exhausted. But
Yeah.
we need to, if we do not stand now, we do lose everything, because they're not on the border. They're in our own lands, in our own houses, our own homes, our own communities, right?
Yes.
So, yeah, go ahead.
Well, one thing I want
Yeah.
thing I want to touch on that John said, and both of you guys are touched or talked about, but so Curtis Yarvin, anybody that's listened to my show, and Johnny, you and I've talked about this, and I'm sure you and I've discussed this too, but people like Curtis Yarvin, Peter Thiel, Elon, the whole tech world, are they wanting to get away from those terms dictators to make you start thinking in terms of like the benefit of what they're, in my view, what they are attempting to usher in? I don't know if I said that right, but
Okay. I was in Silicon Valley in, the days all of these guys were coming up, right? San Francisco, and had my own tech companies, and I've been in some of these conversations, right?
this was when? What years, roughly?
Not late 90s, mid 90s into late 2000s. Okay. And actually, I didn't leave there till just a couple of years ago, actually, but I did go away in special forces and doctoral studies and all that kind of stuff for some years. They believe in the current. Now, they know the system has to be changed. They know it needs to be updated, and it needs to be modified. It needs to use technology best as possible to remove fraud and corruption and graft and all this other stuff. The problem is, and we were having conversation about feudalism back 30 years ago, right? The problem is that they believe too much in their technology, and none of these men are men of violence. Not a one of them. And they don't understand that the only real currency when it gets to places like this isn't some advanced technology, isn't some tokenized, no. At this point where we are, the only real currency remaining is violence. And oh, by the way, their systems have a fundamental flaw. Their entire system is dependent upon one thing, and it can be turned off permanently: electricity.
I might be wrong about this, but I think Curtis Yarvin is in a different category to the others.
Could be. Yeah, I don't know. I never met him, so.
No, I've just been from listening to him. I don't know him very much at all, but I mean, I have kind of objections to some of the stuff he
Yeah.
puts across. But what he was getting at here was, I think, very close to the Prince thing. Like, he was talking about the monarch, I think,
Yeah.
and he was saying that, well, even the word dictator, I think was what he meant. Well, let's get over our little, let's just look at it, and by that he meant presumably something like the philosopher King, the idea that one strong man, with good intentions, is a better option than, a dozen idiots sitting around a table.
Who told us kings and princes were bad?
Yeah, that's right.
The Financialists?
Yes.
Weren't they trying to, didn't they? Right, I've written a couple of articles on this about how this whole liberal democracy thing is a creation of the Financialists out of Venice. You can go back 700s, right? The Republican form.
Yeah.
And they've been steadily rolling that out. Why? Because the princes have physical title to the land.
Yes.
And in order for the Financialists to, buy and sell that on behalf of other princes, they have to bring about this thing called liberal democracy. So there are no princes, right? There's oligarchs, but there's no princes that will stand and fight you for the title. You can sell that deed off as many times as you want, but I'm going to stand right here on this ground with these people, and you try and take possession, we'll kill you. So they had to get rid of princes.
But yes, and one of the consequences of that has been the kind of world which we have now, which has turned into a kind of a babel of experts, whereby everything is dictated by experts. But there are so many experts that they all have equal power, and they cannot decide anything, and they never disagree.
No, but they can obfuscate. Right? Yeah. They're the keepers of the arcanum of the magic.
Yes. Whereas in the past, the philosopher King, he would listen to the experts, he would call in the experts, whether
Yeah.
they were an economist, whatever, and say, okay, what do you think? And then he would speak to his people in their own language, and
Yes.
he would mediate
Yes.
the expertise he had received from maybe different sources, and
Yeah.
that would become, in a certain sense, the law.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad way of doing things. We
No.
could do with getting some of that back, couldn't we?
Oh, it'd come back quickly. Like I'll say this right now. I've said it several times. I've said it publicly. If William was to walk out on the balcony there at Buckingham and call the banners, millions would come. Now he can't do that because his security would kill him.
Hmm.
But if he had his own security, maybe somebody like Eric Prince or somebody was securing him, and he walked out on that balcony and called the banners, millions would come.
Yes.
Blood would follow, but either we lose everything or blood's coming anyways. That's just a fact.
But isn't there a problem with the family, the idea of royal lineage, that it's kind of, by definition, corruptible along the way, and that it's quite arbitrary in its, it's just a random family in a sense.
Yes or no? I mean, he does through his mother have direct lineage back to, actually, his father's got Plantagenet blood as well. So because of Lady Spencer, Princess Diana, he does actually have genetically better claim to the throne than anybody that sat on it since 1688.
Really?
Yeah.
And you think
his brother's the illegitimate, he doesn't, right? But
do you have faith in William as a person, as a man?
yes. I don't if he's still owned by a security, as his family's been owned since the 1600s.
Right.
That army that was sent over, that Dutch army that was sent over with William of Orange, wasn't there just to conquer and beat the English peoples into submission. It was there to make sure that the king did what the king was told.
Is there any way back from where we are?
We have to go back to when was the last honest, where is the title that we can trust, right? The deed, right? The property book of our lands and our peoples. Where is the last property book we can trust? And we have to go back to that, and then we have to stand and fight for it.
What is your definition of
here's a good thing. Here's a good thing. If we do start standing and fighting, a lot of these people export themselves.
Yes.
Easily half of them, if not a lot more. All right, Mike, you're going to say something.
No, I think you kind of answered. I said, what is your definition of stand up for fight? Because, and I've said this many a times, I don't see the will in the United States, at least through my lens, when I'm out and about, small little sliver of Arizona, I just don't see it.
You have to, in Ireland specifically, the UK, Ireland, you need to take back control of your government. That's the thing that has to happen first.
Well,
and you have to do it physically. You're going to have to physically ensure that you're going to have to remove some people that are not there legitimately. And you need to restore the legitimacy of your government. And then you marshal the people and your country to restore it to its own lands and titles, to its, restore the lands and titles to its own people.
You see, there are multiple. I don't want to be ready.
And it's the same here too, by the way. Yeah, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah.
Don't be blackpilling the idea because it's.
John, let me interrupt you. I hate that term. I get called that. This is another thing I've been attacked the last couple of days.
Okay.
No, you're fine. You can say whatever you want. I've been getting attacked literally over the last few days of being black. I'm so black-pilled. I'm a doomer, and I just want to say for people that are listening, I am not black-pilled or doomer, okay? I'm objective of where I think things are. And, I could be wrong. I'm wrong more than I'm right. But this whole term to me is totally outplayed of black pill and doomer.
Well, it's used like a conspiracy theorist to discredit somebody.
It is actually, yeah. And
Thank you.
I used it there defensively, and I shouldn't.
I'm sorry. John, I mean to interrupt you. I just had to go off on a tangent for a minute.
Okay. I'll say what I was going to say without the caveats. That there are issues in our culture now that block, very tangibly block those kind of responses, Ian. That, for example, the forces of the policing forces, the military forces are working for the criminals, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, the new owners, they're working for the new landowners.
yes, yes. And the media, similarly, which is the conversation. It's the instrument of the conversation of the people. That's what it is. It's not a megaphone of the power, really. It's also the voice box of the people, and that has been commandeered and corrupted by my own former profession, journalism. And that's a kind of a really fundamental obstacle, because what it means is that the people can't see each other, they can't hear each other, and understand where things are coming from. Because if they could, even in the faces of each other, they would be able to communicate history and culture and memory to each other in the course of bringing these things to fruition. And they're not able to do that because they're blocked. There's literally shadows everywhere and they can't see.
Yep.
And so now these are pretty difficult. I'm not saying they're insurmountable difficulties, but they're intractable. They're really difficult. They're great difficulties. And I think the conversation one is the primary one. It's the foundational one. If we could get to that and reverse it. Now in the United States, from my perception of the United States in general, it seems to be far better in this regard.
Depends on which state. Yeah.
You think?
Some of our states here in the United States are just as bad as Ireland.
Okay. But you also have guns, which is another thing we don't have.
Yeah, but let's be honest about that. And I'm just going to put it out there, guys, all right? 90% of people that have guns will never use it, even in blatant self-defense. They can chit-chat all they want. They can talk all they want. Now, the good thing is maybe up to 10% will, and that's all you need. But most people who have guns won't even use them in their own self-defense.
We saw it during COVID.
Yeah, they will comply.
I think people would comply again, not under COVID, but I think in the right scenario.
Well, I don't know just yet. I think in some areas, yes. Give me a second. When a government has become so corrupted that it is not working for the peoples of the lands and it's working for foreign masters, that government is invalid.
Yes.
It lacks any legitimacy.
Yes.
This is when revolutions happen.
That's the point. That's the point. That's what I keep, all these are crimes. There's nothing organic about them. They're not things that just so happened, accidents. They're not, unfortunate events. They're actually planned crimes.
Your enemies are the bureaucratic class, the political and bureaucratic class. Yeah. That's your enemies because they're being paid. Because the only thing these folks care about are the 3 Ps: payroll, promotions, and pensions. Yeah, that's all bureaucrats, functionaries care about. That's all they've ever cared about from the beginning of time. And if their foreign masters are paying that through various, bond issuances and other structures, et cetera, right?
Yes.
They'll work for their boss against their own people because their own people were so impoverished they can't pay any of those 3 things.
There's another aspect as well, which is the people themselves are suffering from not just indoctrination, but something close to hypnosis. Yeah. Or something analogous. I mean, it's more than a metaphor. It's actually close to being a literal description in some respects, for example, they actually the sense, one of the things they can't imagine is things becoming terrible. They cannot imagine the kind of chaos that is implicit in everything we're talking about. The potential for chaos and absolute bloodshed and horror. It's there. It's right there. It's outside our window, but most people cannot see it because it's unimaginable to them because they live through a period of contentment and complacency and prosperity.
Comforts.
Can I add to what John just said and ask you both something and get your take on it? Do you think that it is being done intentionally right now? Some of the things to trigger this type of response because ultimately it's going to lead to more people dying, and they want this world less populated anyway? Or are they trying to avoid the idea of a civil kinetic conflict?
Different factions want different things. So it's not as simple, and this is the other problem we have, right? Is all things are factional, and the factions might collaborate here and there, but they all have their own distinct thoughts about what the final outcome's supposed to be. And so you're dealing with a bit of that, both of those, and several other main movements, right? Like the owners, the actual new owners, they don't want everything physically destroyed. That's assets they bought.
Yes. Yes.
Right?
Yes. Yeah, I think most people, one of the things I wonder about, and maybe this is a naive position in relation to politicians, not all of them, but I wonder how much they know about what they're actually doing.
No, look at what they do, right? Look at how steadily dumber they've all gotten on purpose, right? Because the last thing the owners, the property managers want is some smart bloke or lass who figures out and knows the system and can organize people and clean things up. They need the dumb ones. And oh, by the way, the dumb ones, and they need them resentfuls. They need them, the unpretty people. Right? The resentful, unpretty people. Not to pick on us ugly people. Right?
I like it.
Right?
Well, John and Ian, you're more handsome than I am, so I'm just glad I'm sitting in company with you two fine gentlemen right now.
Glasses on.
I think that's your title right there, Mike. The
let me ask you guys both. You guys doing okay on time?
Yeah, I'm all right.
Turning to what's been going on, what came this morning with Trump announcing that they're going to federalize D.C. What are your thoughts? John, I don't know if you saw that, but EM, you either. But any initial thoughts on that? And then he also, before you answer, he also was asked a question about New York, potentially New York, Chicago, and L.A., and he did not rule that out. But I'd just be curious what.
Okay, I think, quite literally, I think that the purchasers of Europe and the Isles. Let's just drop the British part. Let's just start calling them the Isles, right?
I like it.
Were the oil kingdoms. I think the purchasers of the U.S. lands were the cartels, because they're the ones that had the liquidity, the cash flow. Just under $2 trillion a year now, cash, right? So what I suspect is happening is something I wrote about a couple of years ago, or thought, some time ago. The fight that Europe has is the same kind of fight, but with a different enemy here in the United States. Now, we've got some of that here too, in Dearborn, Michigan, and other places. But our fight here is with the cartels, because they're the ones, going back to the 1970s, have been steadily using the equivalent of $1.5 trillion a year to buy up everything. Politicians, bureaucrats, judges, banks, businesses, land. That's how they launder the money. And the banks have become so dependent on them. Right? This is the thing learned in Prohibition, is that you didn't need an actual functioning economy. You didn't need an industrial base. You just needed enough of an illusion one because you could make so much more money with so much higher margins on crime. And all the banks had to do is figure out how to launder the money. And it used to be the banks were the keepers of the sophisticated business knowledge in a local and regional area. They were the ones who, because the bank needed to make returns and needed to manage risk, the banks had to make sure there was a functioning economy and all the relationships and all the dynamics. But starting in the 1920s, late 19 teens, early 1920s, the whole system here in the United States, at least, learned that it didn't need any of that. It just needed this illicit business. It just needed trafficking. And now we're up to just under $2 billion a year. Well, that's been going on for almost 100 years, getting bigger and bigger and bigger and displacing more and more and more and more parts of the country. So what I suspect is coming here, because I don't believe it was Israel that killed Kennedys. I think it was the mafia. Now, Israel might have been somewhat involved, etc., but we like to blame the Jews for a whole lot of things. It's easy. We've been doing that for centuries. And some of their leadership, like I wrote about in this article here recently, they go along with it because it makes them wildly, wealthy and gives them power over their own people. But what I suspect is coming here is we are going, the conflict that's going to happen in the Isles and in parts of continental Europe is going to be an expulsion of millions and millions and millions of people that don't belong there, and a restoration of the title to the lands. Here, it's going to be a cartel war.
Is there any agency of good authority in the wider world that might intervene to reverse this process?
No, peoples of the lands have to do it themselves. That's an old knowledge.
What about Russia?
Russia's doing everything that it can. That's the thing about BRICS. BRICS are doing everything that they can to ensure that the world doesn't devolve into World War III, to lock in the steel by killing all the native sons. Right? They're doing everything they can. But great powers can't get involved in the internal, because the moment they try to do anything internal to Europe or the Isles or here, that would be casus belli for World War III. So when your enemy or one of your peers is in such a state as we're all in, you got to wall them off. You got to do what you can from the outside, but you got to stay out of their business because it'll be used as a casus belli for war against you.
Yes.
Right?
So even with Putin's rhetoric about the Christianization of the de-Christianization of Europe and Christendom and all that, he can't do anything.
No, he can't. No, what's happening in the rest of the world is they are looking at us and seeing one of three paths. One, we totally collapse and disappear over the next 2 generations as a people. And now they've got a threat out there that's got 8,000 nukes, 6,000 nukes, 7,000 nukes, and tons of natural resources, and could be a real threat. Or they see us going to civil wars where we tear out our own governments and retake power on our own lands and then expel the foreigners. Or the third path is and hold our own lands and titles and go back about restoring the title to the people through formal structures and processes. Or they see a long, slow decay collapse like they went through under communism. It's those 3 pathways. Now, in the English-speaking peoples, we do every 400 years tend to go punch each other in the face. But we did it over. We don't collapse. We come out of it with a better perfection of of our constitutional dooms of Alfred thinking, a better articulation of the balance of power and the rule of law, and a restoration of private property. Now, are we going to do that now? Are we flooded enough with enough peoples? I don't know. But our way is to, when it gets right to it, punch each other in the face and get it over with.
Well, what kind of a time frame have we got? Because it seems to me, watching the demographic change, the demographic is extraordinarily deceptive. They're very extraordinarily deceptive because they happen, first slowly, then really fast, the shifts. And you can see this now in Ireland, whereby different metrics, the incoming population, the immigration, is increasing. The outgoing, the emigrating population to Australia and Canada and those places is increasing also, almost at the same rate. But a very interesting figure that I've been watching is the natural increase figure, which is halved in the last 20 years. In other words, the difference between deaths and births. And that's a really telling figure in respect of an indigenous population, predominantly. because to whatever extent it affects the incoming population, that's even worse news for the indigenous population. And so that's really, these figures are really dismal. And I remember actually even 6-7 years ago when we used to talk about Ireland, about the danger that we were facing, we used to kind of say, thinking we were being somewhat alarmist, maybe, that like we would be a minority, Irish would be a minority in their own country by 2050. Well, that's delusional now. Obviously, I mean, it's 2030 now. It's looking like if we're not already there, if the figures aren't completely cooked, and we're actually already there, it's well possible. Because if you look at any streetscape, particularly in the urban areas, it looks like we're a tiny minority.
Okay. Here's the thing: if you all stand, even here, if we actually stand and retake our governments and reverse this, a lot of these people, if it goes to violence, a lot of these people are going to remove themselves. They're just there for free paychecks, for cheap living. They're peasants. They're just poor people from around the world.
Well, that's
the moment it turns dangerous or violent, a lot of them are going to leave.
What have the leaders been promised in order to deliver this? The leaders of our governments.
Pensions, payrolls, promotions.
Houses in Addis Ababa or somewhere, I don't know, mansions. Maybe
they don't care as long as they get paid better and get paid well. These are our own parasites parasitizing us. We've always got them.
That's the one thing where I've wondered with the threshold, because somebody on Twitter or X, Porter Stansberry, who I had on a few months ago, but he was talking about what occurred in Cincinnati a few weeks back with that woman getting beat up, and then the chief of police is a woman. Same in Cleveland, I just found out, where I'm from. Her very snarky answer, and then the mayor, fact that he wasn't going to call and reach out. At what point are people that live in these communities that don't have the financial means to leave say, fuck it, enough is enough? And the same with school boards. I can't believe it hasn't happened yet, where some parent is like, lunging.
It's happening. It's actually happening. It's just we're not seeing it broadcast. It's happening. It's not lunging. We're still, again, the English-speaking peoples are a people who believe in the rule of law. That's where it started with Alfred the Great, under the dooms of Alfred, right? It's what brought us together and set us forward as a civilizational people, is this adherence to the rule of law. At some point, we realized that those who are in these positions are not acting in accordance with the law. And therefore, they're not legitimate. And we have the right to remove them.
Yes, I think, and the other factor, I think, which is very much related to that, is the abuse of the law by the authorities and by the police forces.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah. That people, they will wait for the police to do their duty. But one of the things that people don't seem to realize is that, they complain about that foreigners in their countries are being treated better than they are, as though that were kind of not quite true, but in danger of being true. But in fact, it's actually true with knobs on, because those people come to our countries surrounded by a force field of UN protection, legally and otherwise.
And financially.
So they have hugely, vastly superior rights to the indigenous population. And this is maddening people. And the fact that then they see, so ultimately when they see that violence has been exercised against them by the police in order to protect these people, and but these people, when they break the law, they're just basically blind eyes are turned. So I think that's going to be the tipping point before too long. That'll be the trigger that will set things off. And I agree. I think it's well overdue in a sense. I'm surprised that it has taken so long. And I think I can only put that down. And I think you're right about the estrogen factor. And that's particularly true in Ireland. I got to tell you, it's really bad. And, men have been feminized. I mean, 50 years of feminism has indoctrinated them into believing that their grandfathers were monsters, and they got to wear white ankle socks in order to prove that they're not a danger to women,
And women don't love the idea of family. They love OnlyFans. That's what I meant to chime in and say earlier. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Yeah.
They love
pouring out our women
OnlyFans.
so that it opens up the rape because they're lascivious, right? It decreases. At some point, the men are just going to stand up and say, fuck it. It's going to be some women, though, by the way, who are going to actually wake up and fucking realize they love their people enough, and it's their assets that are really in danger. And they're going to wake up and tell the men, and then men are going to be like, yeah, fuck it. We're back in control.
Yeah.
We're back in control. And it doesn't have to be done, the removal of the government. You don't have enough cops and you don't have enough military combined to stop the people of Ireland from taking back their government. But it's not going to happen through elections because those have been so corrupted and so dirtied. And half the shit that happens now is, the thing you have to do there is something that's happening here in the United States under Trump's administration. And that is that you have to restore your judiciary. That's where all your focus needs to be. Lawsuits, wise men, and some women that are good with the law, that can go in and parse out all of this magic, because that's what it is. And you need to restore your judiciary.
Everything is rotten there.
Everything's rotten, but it can be reset. It can be restored. And it can happen rather quickly. It's happening here in the United States at an unbelievable, furious pace.
This might be the estrogen working, but I have some residual hope that we would move towards some form of velvet revolution, such as happened in Prague in 1989. Yeah. What do you think of the chances of that? Because that was a bloodless revolution.
Well, I think Ireland can do that. But again, you have to know where the enemy is, right? You have to know the locus of power. It isn't all these poofs, right? In all these positions. It's the fuckers in the judiciary, because that's where real power is in the English, the English civilizational peoples. It's in the judiciary. Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
All efforts, right? All efforts need to focus on how do you get back to Irish constitutionality and back to common law.
Yes.
Right? Because nobody's challenging these things. Somebody's funding these laws, etc. And there's nobody, and certainly nobody of real substance, that's fighting all this stuff in the courts and then forcing the high court to judge on all this lower level stuff that's happening. It's happening here in the United States at an unbelievable pace, and it's brilliant. Yes, and I guarantee you, if you had some folks like yourself who understood the history, and then also some of these younger guys who are good with AI prompts, you could use, I would stay away from ChatGPT or any of its art fronts, which a lot of these AI companies out here that have ChatGPT alternative, you look behind, ChatGPT is the engine. So I would look to Grok or a couple others, and I would get some young people who really know how to write prompts and know how to use the technology, and go in and help lay the argumentative groundwork for the restoration of judiciary and the drawing out into the open of the unconstitutional acts that the judiciary has been conducting.
Yes.
And you got to keep up with the marshes. You got to keep up, because judges are cowards. And there's no politician, no bureaucrat of any level, right up to that little leprechaun you guys got there as a president, right? Or prime minister, whoever the hell he is.
President, yeah.
Yeah. I want my lucky charms. That's what I think of whenever I see that little guy. But point being is, none of them are with guns protected like the judges are.
Well, the judges have committed enormous crimes.
Yes.
In plain sight. I mean, they actually lie, and they do it in front of people. Right? It's extraordinary. And they have dismantled our constitution. They have torn it to shreds.
So focus all of your conversations and dialogues on where the power resides. It's with the judiciary, and they need to know that the Irish people see them. We see this. We see it. We know where to focus.
Yes. Again,
right? And it doesn't take violence, right? Doesn't require. If it goes to violence, they'll push it there.
Yes. Again, the problem is that the conversation isn't available by which you can communicate these ideas in the relentless way you need to do it in order to impact and to because I've one of the things we've learned in this phase, I think very clearly, is this, since the COVID business, is that you know, the way we absorbed information primarily was by repetition. And unless you have a machine that's repeating the same message quite a lot, people think they haven't heard it. People think I picked
You
it up.
got to get to the youth who are pissed off and tired and have had enough and just need to know what to do. That's the thing about our generation. I'm not a boomer, I'm an Xer, right? But an older one. That's the point of our generation, is we have to help the younger people who have the skills and the knowledge and the energy and the drive. We have to help them. So how do we connect with enough of them? And it only takes a few. That's like this, was it Big Balls here and Doge?
Yeah.
Right? The 19, 20-year-olds that came in. You need the same thing in Ireland. And you got them. And oh, by the way, you got a bunch of them here that are Irish.
So you say Gen Z, isn't it? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah. Well, younger millennials and Gen Z. Yeah. Yeah.
The millennials were a bit of a disappointment, though, weren't they?
Well, the younger, go for the young. Well, but here's the thing. Once you get the estrogen shit under control, testosterone production comes back like that.
Yeah.
I mean, it comes back quick.
Boy, that would be good.
Yeah.
I was hoping you'd attack the boomers for a few minutes, EM, just to get a little bit of get them all fired up.
Don't kick the old fucker on his way out the door.
Not John. No, not John.
I'm a boomer.
Not John. You're an exception. You're an exception to some of these boomers. They all get mad at me. I get
they're
emails.
A product of their time. Yeah, they're a product of their time too, though, Ryan. I wrote an article about this. They're a pros. They're a product of their own time, and one of the things we have to ask ourselves is who gave them all the fucking drugs in the '60s and why?
Yeah.
Well, and what psychological experience were the intelligence agencies doing on population scales at the time?
Yeah, but it's interesting you say that about being a late or
Xer.
Like I'm a late boomer, and I do think not this isn't I hope too much of an invention, but I think that my generation, I used to have a concept of the 55 club, that people who were born that we were kind of like the conscience of the boomers, the late conscience of the boomers, because we had begun to understand that the freedom project that the boomers had embarked on was a failure, and that they weren't being honest about it. They weren't actually telling truthful stories of their experiences, and they were making out that everything they had sought by the way of desire had actually satisfied them, and of course nothing had.
No. So when I say late Xer, I mean I'm closer to boomer in age, right? I'm getting close to 60 now. So I watched this from the late 60s, right?
Yeah.
I watched it play out, and there was, in the Gen X generation, the smallest, there isn't really that much of a distinction between the earlies and the lates, right? Except for the lates had more proximity to, the boomer generation. The early ones were born in and around the whole yuppie era, the booming Reagan Thatcherite era, or became old enough to be aware of themselves as independent future things. They're the ones that are harder right now to get involved because they're at the peak of their careers right now.
Yeah, I detect something really interesting happening with really young children that are emerging now. I know a 6-year-old boy who's like really sharp. Like he's like he's been here before, and he knows all. And he's reading books. He's 6 and he started learning to read, but he's reading books about World War II and the Vietnam War. He wants to, and I said, well, I hope you don't want to go and join the army, are you? And he says, I just want to find out what they did. And this is incredible, really. And he's not exceptional. I see him with his mates, and they're talking about all kinds of stuff really intelligently at 6. So I think the world is going to be changed. But so that's the question, I suppose, to kind of come to, if we're coming to the end. It's like, really, the world can't go on like this with these elites dictating stuff and the financialists. It has to stop. And the manipulation of life and the imprisonment of people in each new set of technology that comes available. It's not like the adults have to re-enter the room, don't they? If they exist.
Well, more precisely, the princes have to return.
Yes.
And rally the people.
Are they there? Are they there watching, waiting?
I don't know. I don't know many of the old families are, but in these times of great change, at the utmost, right? That old term, at the utmost, new princes emerge.
You see, because that's the thing that strikes me as being the most significant thing about all of the present time compared to when I was a child. That when I was a child, you had always this sense of justice, almost like and fairness, as being like background radiation in reality. And that meant that if something went if against you, if somebody was doing something to you, there was a place you could go and explain yourself in simple sentences, and you would be understood. And moreover, you would be agreed with. You knew that if your story was true and real, that you would be believed and action would be taken. And you felt safe on account of that. That's gone. There are no adults anymore that you can go and say to.
No.
I mean, I suppose I'm the adult now, and I hope I'm that person. But in general, as a person, as whatever we call ourselves, citizens, there's nowhere you can go. I mean, the judiciary is completely corrupt. The police is corrupt. The politics is corrupt. The media is corrupt. Science is corrupt. The medical profession is corrupt. Totally. You can't go into a hospital because you
The
probably come
the
out in a
corruption's corrupt. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Even the criminals are corrupt. Yeah.
So I will, and I'm getting tired a little, actually, gentlemen.
Yes.
Uh, One thing I think we do need to remember is that that was all still extant only not but 25 years ago, right? So it's not like this is an ancient history. It's not like it was the 50s or the no. This was turn of the century. All
Yeah.
of this was still here, but
Yes.
the great theft, the great final theft of the commons of all of the West was set in motion in the mid 90s. And then the steady decay, and then, the kicking off of this just mind fuck insanity to put us in this insane place as they do the final steal and all of this, that's only since about 2012. So
Agreed.
that's not even 25 years back. So
Right.
it's all still here. Um, we need to remember that, and we need to hold on to that, because we've still got your generation around. We still have some of the silent generation around. We still have, well, half of the Xers are already dead anyways, but the rest of us are around to remember it. The
Yes.
older millennials were young and kids at the time, so they're not there. The astounding thing is my daughter's a Gen Z. They're giving up drinking. They're going back to normal all this, despite all of this programming from the moment they were born. And she's going to turn 17 here in a couple of weeks. They're already going back.
Yeah, and I think as well that whereas the millennials have a bad reputation, and I would add, I would kind of bear witness against them to a high degree. But now I notice, because I have a daughter in that category and her husband,
Mm.
and they're actually becoming aware
Yes,
of
yes,
uh,
yes.
and they're you see
They're getting involved. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they're idealistic people. You see, it's just that they were misled. Everything was warped.
Yes, on purpose.
Yes,
On the very same people who drugged your generation, they drugged the millennials with entertainment and
yeah,
touchy-feely feel-goods and all that other stuff.
yeah,
They did it for the same reason, to weaken the next large cohort that could be a threat to them.
yes. But their hearts are in the right place.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
think.
and they're community oriented. They're right. The
Yeah.
problem is they've had their empathy weaponized since they were kids,
Yes.
and they've had
But
their own culture and society and civilization ripped from them by the education systems and the cultural systems, et cetera, since they were kids.
so there is actually hope.
Yes.
I,
Yeah.
I think
Your
so.
generation and my generation, or Mike and I's generation, has got to hold the line for another till the end of the next decade. I think is when this all comes to a final fruition. To a question you asked earlier, I don't think it gets to the. It might kick off here in the United States a little earlier, but I don't. I think the conflagration part of it is still a couple years away. When it happens, though, it'll happen quick. And
Yes.
if it happens, it'll be over relatively quick, like as in 3 years, maybe. Think the Spanish Civil War. And then by the latter part of the next century, we'll have put in place this updating of the English civilization and a restoration of rights and privileges and balance of power and all of that.
Yes. I hope I'm still around for that. It sounds like an interesting.
Yeah. So on a Tuesday in August in 2038, we should have another conversation.
Okay.
Ian, where can people find you?
Substack's probably best. I am starting to take shorts from videos like this and put them up on the New Nobility channel on YouTube. Trying to start building that up to get these little snippets of the conversations. Okay.
What's your YouTube channel too?
And YouTube is youtube.com/@ New Nobility.
And then
all right. So I'm starting to.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead.
No, please finish.
Well, and I'm starting just this morning to put up these shorts. I'll do more of that to promote these great conversations with great hosts and great fellow guests. And then, of course, Twitter. Although I'm being heavily limited on Twitter, I think I was talking violence too openly for a while.
Did you put in timeout or anything?
Not calling for it, by the way. What's that?
Did you get put in a timeout chair or whatever?
No, I haven't done. I've been fortunate there. I haven't. I got flagged by somebody who said that I was spamming, but that was just somebody being a dick.
You know what? I got put in timeout for talking about Trump meme coins. I wasn't even talking about it. This was like 4 months ago with Marty Bent, and I got restricted, so I couldn't share it, and nobody could repost it.
Yeah.
John, where can people find you?
They find me on Substack as well, johnwaters.substack.com or John Waters Unchained. I'm also, I share a YouTube channel with a colleague, Jerry O'Neill. It's called The Scholar Gypsies, and we do videos there from time to time. And I'm on Twitter, but like Ian, and I find that nothing I do can get out anymore, so I hardly bother. Occasionally I post something, but I've more or less given up on it. Elon never got to Dublin with his new broom. And he needs to really urgently bring a new broom and batter people across the head with it over there, because it's really dismal.
We can entice him with an old rare cask of Bushmills or something.
We have to wind this conversation down because the lights are turning down on John. So we have to end it. But in another 5 minutes, he's going to be completely in the dark.
Oh, yeah, I'd forgotten. I do have a light, actually.
No, it's okay. It's okay.
It's all good.
Guys, I thank you so much for this. I look forward to the next one, and continue to follow along both your work and more conversations ahead.
Thank you all. Thank you both very much.
Mic drop.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.